Thank you for raising the height of the music stand as well. That's good. Can actually see my notes now, which is great. And big welcome to everybody. Delighted you can join us this morning, whether you're here in the building, a Bridge community here, West Roadside, or whether you're online. Delighted you could join us as we carry on this series. Jesus, learning from him. Jesus, of course, is, for us, the ultimate role model. He's the one we can learn from. He's the one who helps us cope with life. And in particular this morning, we're thinking about this idea of things crowding in on us. Jesus was not immune to crowds or pressures coming upon him. And so we want to take some time out this morning during our teaching time to learn, how can we cope with pressure? How can we cope when crowds are pressing in? And in a way this morning we experienced that. You know, you just come along to church, thought, oh, we'll set a few things up. And you get somebody who's struggling with mental health, you get the police arriving, your neighbors are all coming in and everything's going on. And, you know, sometimes life just caves in on us, doesn't it? Sometimes there's just pressure. And so how do we cope? And we're going to look at that this morning in particular. If my clicker will work. There we go. Nope. Went too far the other way. There you go, that's the answer. Hey, there we go. Thank you, gents at the back. So this morning we're thinking about three things can help us as we look at the life of Jesus when we're coping with things crowding in on us. First of all, we need some distance. Secondly, we need to delegate. Or thirdly, we need some diversity. So these three things, somehow, we just try and cope with crowds. We try and survive when things crowd in. Pressures from family, pressures from work, pressures from exams, all these things coming in on us. How do we cope? How do we move beyond survive? Well, as we look at the life of Jesus, we see he created some space. And sometimes that can be incredibly helpful for us. Secondly, he included other people. He said, help me with this task. Delegation. And thirdly, as he delegates, he doesn't just delegate to people similar to him. He has a diversity and a variety in order to cope with the crowds who are piling in on him. In order to help us with this morning, we're carrying on just systematically working our way through the Gospel of Mark. That's the second book in the second part of the Bible. And we just made it to chapter 3. So we're going along, not very quickly, but it's all full of good stuff. The book of Mark is one of 4 accounts about the life and ministry of Jesus. And each of those accounts is written by a different author, different perspective for a different audience. So we get this overall fantastic picture of Jesus of Nazareth. But Mark writes to people like us. He writes to Western Europeans. He writes to people who have to cope with things called empire, market, these kinds of things. This is who Mark writes to, and it's a fast-paced challenge to us. And he's saying, do you know what? Everything you face at the center of the empires the Romans were facing at that time, we have got someone better than Caesar. We've got something better than your system. The system of empire versus the kingdom of peace that Jesus brings in. And so as we look at Jesus, we see there's miracles. We see the teaching. And Mark challenges us, who is this Jesus? And if you discover and learn that he's God, what is going to be your response to him? And of course, for us as a church, that's really important. We say in our vision statement, we're a Jesus-centered people longing to see lives transformed in Bury St Edmunds and beyond. Because as we center on Jesus, then we realize we can start to have some solutions to the struggles and issues that we face in life. And as we come into Mark chapter 3, we see Jesus is being radical. Jesus is challenging the status quo. He's bringing this new message. It's a message of love. It's a message of inclusion. It's a message of healing. The current system that Jesus faced at that time were people who were terrified of disobeying God. So they had these rules, they had these regulations, they had their Old Testament law, around about 613 laws. They then add another load of laws on top of that and another load of barriers. And they were just so passionate about rules, regulations, and trying to keep on track with God that somehow they lost sight of, what about love? What about compassion? What about inclusion? What about helping people really connect with God? And this is what Jesus brings, this radical contrast. And you might think, brilliant. Everybody's got to be up for a bit of love, haven't they? That must be great. But actually, we see two major threats start to impact the life of Jesus. First of all, we see the threat of murder. Mark 3, verse 6 says, "Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus." You might think this is bonkers. This guy's bringing healing and love and compassion, and people are trying to kill him. Well, the problem was, with him offering this radical contrast, we start to see an issue here because the status quo is being challenged. People's authority, people's positions of power are being challenged by Jesus. And so you see this weird combination of Pharisees, a super religious, passionate people about the Bible, pairing up with Herodians. Herodians were people who loved the Greek-Roman Empire. They loved materialism. They loved education and entertainment. And they threw a bit of God in on top, just in case, to cover their backs. So you've got these two weird groups, extremes, coming together and saying, we're going after Jesus. Quite a bizarre combination of people. And this word kill in the Greek, it can actually mean overthrow or undermine. The most extreme translation of that Greek original word is kill. But regardless of what it means, they're out after Jesus. So straight away we see something pressing in and crowding in on Jesus. Jesus is under threat. But also Jesus is under threat because of his popularity. Jesus is like Marmite, isn't he? Anybody here like Marmite? Well, there's a few. Oh, you're weird people. I hate Marmite. I can say that easily because my wife loves Marmite and we're still together after 20 years, so it's okay. We can work this out. But Jesus was like that. You either love or you hate Marmite. Nobody's in the middle. And this is what was happening with Jesus. So you've got these guys trying to kill him. Then we've got all these other people who love him to pieces. And they want a piece of him, and they're crowding in. Listen to this, verses 7 and 8. A large crowd from Galilee followed. When they heard all Jesus was doing, many people came to him from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, the regions across the Jordan and around Tyre and Sidon. Word had got out. There was this radical young preacher, rabbi, teacher who was doing miracles, and people are saying, hey, I want to see if this is true. I want to see with my own eyes. I want to experience this. And so they all start to gather around Jesus. The local people of Galilee, where Jesus was spending 80% of his time, appeared. But then we read about all these other places, to the south, to Judea, Jerusalem, the capital, Idumea. That was where King Herod came from, the richest man in the world at that point in time. A place of materialism, Greek, Roman philosophy, and a center of all that. They were coming. From the east, across the other side of the Jordan, they're coming. To the north and to the west, from Tyre and Sidon, they're coming. Everybody, different worldviews, different backgrounds, different perspectives, they're all piling in to get a piece of Jesus. And you might, wow, the pressure of popularity. And then we see the reality of it, that it's actually becoming quite scary as we read in verse 10. For Jesus had healed many, so that those with diseases were pushing forward to touch him. Again, in the original Greek, that pushing forward means the idea of falling forward. Some of us have been witnesses, where big crowds pile in and crush. This is the picture here. There's a real crush moving in around Jesus. So for Jesus, life was getting crowded. He was being threatened, but then he was being almost under pressure from the sheer popularity of his impact. And therefore, as we look at our lives, we might feel threatened. Maybe something's going on at work. Maybe there's a relationship breaking down. Or on the other hand, you're so good at what you do, everybody's pressing in on you. Everybody wants a piece of you. And of course, we're finding this more and more at church as people are discovering what we can do, what we can offer. The demand is increasing and increasing. How do we cope with this? Well, this is where we turn and try and learn of Jesus. First of all, as we said earlier, we need to put some distance in place in order to thrive with the crowds. So as things are pressing in on you, what distance do you get? What do you do in order to create some space away from that pressure? For me, I like a good walk. Put a podcast on in my ears and off I go walk and pray and chat things through with God. I find that incredibly helpful just to give a bit of space and a bit of perspective. But we're all different, aren't we? We all have different measures. Jesus seemed to follow similar approaches here. We read in verse 7 of chapter 3, Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the lake, and a large crowd from Galilee followed. So Jesus withdraws. Remember, he got these people ready to kill him. Jesus doesn't hang around with these people. Jesus doesn't start a debate with them. Jesus doesn't start a fight with them. Jesus does not try and win an argument with them, even though he would have battered them. As you know, he was so bright, so intelligent, so insightful. Rather than doing that, he takes a step away. Okay, you don't like me? I'm not going to start a fight. I'm going to be the person of peace, and I'm going to back off. I'm going to withdraw. But I love the way he withdraws. He withdraws away from his enemies, but he doesn't withdraw from the people who are seeking and searching him. He still welcomed them. Those people who are up to connect with him, he still allowed them to come in there. So yes, there is a pulling away there. There is that sense of Jesus being a peacemaker, but he does still allow people to come near him. And then we see some practical things as well. Verse 9. Because of the crowd, Jesus told his disciples to have a small boat ready for him to keep the people from crowding in. So again, we heard earlier, people are pressing forward, pressing forward. Jesus sometimes liked to use a boat and the water in order as a sort of acoustic sound system. But this time his boat is not a pulpit. It's like a barrier. It's trying to offer some protection so that the people are not crushed. Sometimes we just have to make a practical decision to get some space. A practical, helpful decision that just creates a bit of a barrier to give us some more distance. Spot two more barriers here as we keep reading in verses 11 to 13. Whenever the impure spirits saw Jesus, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." But Jesus gave them strict orders not to tell others about him. Jesus went up on the mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. So Jesus again is trying to get some more distance away from those who want to be in conflict with him. This time, evil spirits. You might think, David, they're actually a great propaganda for him. They're crying out, "Jesus, you're the Son of God." But Jesus doesn't want his enemies driving his agenda. He doesn't want his enemies controlling him, so he just says, "Nah, be quiet. Let's have some distance here." And then finally, his last part of distance was breaking the crowd down into smaller groups. You used to have this expression in America, we need to chunk things down. Chunk it down. From the big crowd, let's get to small groups. And again, of course, that's something we try and do here in church. It's lovely that we can gather as a larger group on a Sunday. But if that's all we've got, it's really difficult to kick on in the things of God. And so during the week, we have what we call grow groups, or we have our ministry teams, where people can meet in smaller groups, do life together, grow together, because just an hour on a Sunday morning isn't going to cut it, really. We need to chunk it down, and this is what Jesus does. He says, right, I want to draw people towards me who want to go deeper, and he begins to challenge some people out of the crowds to come with him. So here we see one of the methods of Jesus coping with the crowds. Get some distance. Withdraw from the pressure of the enemies. Be practical. Surround yourself with a few friends. This will help as you try and cope with things crowding in on you. And of course, as we move on, we see a little bit of delegation. As Jesus withdraws with some of his friends, we see he starts to delegate. Now, this delegation is short-term and longer term. We've already read this verse in verse 9. Because of the crowd, Jesus told his disciples to have a small boat ready for him to keep the people from crowding him. So this didn't require some PhD. Jesus just said to his friends, hey, can we sort a boat out here? Just something practical, something easy. Didn't require a great training program. It was just whoever's available. Can you help? Is there anything we can do now to just take the pressure? Is there anything somebody can do in your life that can just help offload some of that pressure? I know I'm so grateful for so many people here who do so many of the practical jobs, setting the chairs out, the teas, the coffees, the welcoming, all these kinds of things. At times we do feel pressurized, but people are here to help. And sometimes it's just as simple as something practical, like get me a boat. And that helped in that situation. But also there is a long-term intentionality about the delegation of Jesus. As he saw the crowds, he saw the diversity on the crowds, Jesus started to come up with a strategy and thought, this is what is required in order to engage with all these people. And we see it here in verses 14 and 15. Jesus appointed the 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. Jesus sees the press of the crowds. He starts then to act in an intentional way to create something that's sustainable in order to share God's love with the crowds. We've almost got this new era of Israel emerging. See the number 12 there, key number for the nation of Israel. And Jesus is saying there's this new era. Here we go. And what he does, he almost creates a pyramid system in order to handle the crowds. So you've got all the masses there, the crowds. Then you've got people who are serious about following Jesus. And then Jesus seems to have another group of people, 120. Then he has another group of 70 people. And now out of that group, he says, right, I need another 12 who I'm going to invest in. And we discover as we carry on reading that within that 12, he starts to invest in 3 in particular. There's this pyramid system. And Jesus pours in more at the top of the pyramid. Why? Because he loves those people at the top more? No. Why? Because those people at the top are the really super spiritual ones? No. Why? Because those people at the top are brilliant? No. It's because he pours into them so that they can then distribute the goodness of God to other people. It's this beautiful pyramid system that God loves the masses and loves the crowd so much. The key to reaching them and investing in them is to invest in the few. So this can then roll out. And this is what's happening with the 12. And Jesus just doesn't say delegate stuff. He doesn't just say, right, there's a whole load of crowds out there. Crack on, fellas. I've given you the title. Now you get on with it. What does he say? He says, no, be with me. Key part of delegation. Learn what I know. Come and hang out with me, eat with me, travel with me, learn off me when it comes to speaking, praying, dealing with healing and all these different issues. Learn off me by hanging out with me. Absolute investment in the life and ministry of Jesus into these 12 people. This sense of presence, doing life together. Then to be trained up to do some preaching and speaking, outwardly declaring Jesus as the King, and also to push back the forces of evil with the driving out of the demons. It's this beautiful delegation picture. Sometimes we summarize it in a square. You know, I do, you watch, first side of the square. I do, you help, second part of the square. Third part of the square, you do, I help. And the final part of the square, you do, I watch. This is the model Jesus is demonstrating in order to help impact and cope with those crowds. This is something we're really trying to learn as a church at the moment. Over lockdown, we built some relationships with some other churches who seem to be further on in this discipleship piece than us, maybe 5, 10 years further on. And we've asked them to train and help develop us so that we can start to cope with the anticipated crowds we're expecting as we emerge out of COVID. We shared in our vision month, didn't we, about becoming a community hub. And we're just conscious we have to be part of the solution for Bury St Edmunds. People with mental health, people with loneliness, people who are struggling with other health issues, people struggling with education, people struggling to put food on the table and pay their bills. Somehow we have not just got to redesign the building to cope with it, we've got to redesign ourselves in order to cope with it. Mobilize people who are trained and will be ready to respond rightly to the situations and pressures that are coming in. And so over the coming months, as we continue to learn and be trained in this, there will be a transition where we'll start to invite people and say, hey, do you really want to get stuck in? Because it's going to demand more time, more intensity, more intentionality. And obviously, only a few people can do that. Out of all the crowds, Jesus only invited 12. These are the weird ones, yeah? The vast majority, 99% of people are just going to be serious student followers of Jesus. But there will be some who are going to step up, give up jobs, go full time, this kind of approach, sacrifice time in order to learn and carry out the purposes of God. And this is kind of the model that we're having to explore at the moment. What can we do with busy people in order to help us connect more with the crowds? So I appreciate your prayers in these coming days as we're trying to learn more about this model. And of course, as part of this delegation, there needs to be a diversity in terms of the team. Jesus invested in the few, but they're not all the same. This, of course, just reads like a group of names, so I'll try and unpack this a little bit in our last few moments. These are the 12 Jesus appointed: Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter; James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John. To them he gave them the name Boanerges, I think it's pronounced, sons of thunder. Straight away, we're beginning to see some personality types here. If you've got the nickname of Son of Thunder, you can imagine you're a very quiet disposition, can't you? Clearly not. So straight away, we're seeing different personalities. Peter jumps in, both feet first. My brain will follow in a minute. It doesn't matter. But these people, different backgrounds. These are the Bethsaida boys, if you like, the fishermen. The people who are local to Jesus may well have been cousins of Jesus even. They're the first group of people, locals impressed by the Pharisees and their kind of teaching. But then it broadens out. We read these other names: Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, the son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Jesus. We start to see some more less Jewish names, more Greek names. These groups of people, some of these people, probably Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, they're more into the Herodian background. Remember we mentioned the Herodians? Love the Greco-Roman world. They love the empire. They love materialism. They love these kinds of things. So he's got these really Jewish Pharisaical boys. Now he's taken on board these other guys with this quite a worldly worldview. And then, of course, we get the complete nut jobs: Simon the Zealot and Judas Iscariot. These guys are zealots. In our language, we would call them terrorists. These people hated Rome with a passion. So much so that they would murder Roman soldiers and anybody who conspired with them. Welcome to the church ministry team of Jesus. Wow. Absolutely radical, isn't it? So you've got some fishermen, you've got a tax collector, and you've got a terrorist or two thrown in there. Brilliant. But this is the kind of diversity Jesus wants. Different personalities, different worldviews, different backgrounds. Why? Because that is who the crowd are. Remember the crowd earlier? Galilee, south, north, west, east. They came from everywhere. So Jesus is going, I'm putting a team together to cope with everywhere in order to share the good news about Jesus. So yeah, Jesus invested in the few, but it was a diverse few. And of course, this is something we're really trying to do at the moment. We're trying to flatten out the church leadership, multiple subgroups to invest in different leadership with trustees, elders, deacons, staff, etc. Just trying to get this sense of diversity. Why? Because Bury St Edmunds is a town of diversity. We're going to have people with different problems, different issues, different struggles, and somehow we'll have to respond to that. But again, it's going to require that investment. Okay. Final slide. What has God been saying to you this morning as we think about what's crowding in your life? I said earlier, maybe there's family pressures, maybe aging parents, maybe kids going through exams and stuff. Maybe there's challenges in your community with neighbors. Maybe there's some real work or struggles there. What's crowding in? Is anything we've learned this morning, can that help you? Is there any distance you can get just to get back on track? Get your mental health back on track? Is there any delegation you can do? Or maybe Jesus is saying something to you about being part of what we're trying to do here in terms of delegating stuff more and more from church. And also, can we add a bit more diversity? Are you just listening to the same voices, or is there somebody out there who's different from you, who can give a different insight, a different perspective in order to come up with a different solution? Lord Jesus, we just want to be wide open to what you want us to do. This morning we had a little glimpse of some of the problems and issues in our community. before many of you came this morning. Just a little glimpse. Boy, do we need Jesus to help us in these coming days, that we would respond well with the good news. I want to invite the worship band up. In a few moments, we're going to spend a time in communion. One of the things that struck me as I was looking at this passage is, despite the crowds, Jesus does not push anybody away. Sure, he withdraws from some of his enemies, but the rest of the crowds, he puts mechanisms in place so that he can connect and touch with them. We're a crowd of people here this morning. Be encouraged. Jesus wants to invite you up close. And so we're going to sing again, and then we'll take that next step around the time of communion. Thanks, Pam.
Yeah, as we approach communion,